There are 8 billion people in the world today, and even more lost to history. But with biological and psychological differences between these people, not two are the same. For decades now, the field of forensics has been using these unique identifiers to solve some of the world's most heinous and violent crimes. So, we would like to invite you to join us as we discuss the science that cracked the case, because crime will tell. Welcome back to Crime Will Tell. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Kate.
And today we got a very graphic topic. So anybody who's a little bit queasy, anyone who's a little squeezy.
Oh, was that?
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
I don't know the topic. That wasn't foreshadowing, was it? Is there?
No, I mean it is a very graphic subject matter. We are going to be discussing a serial killer.
I'm glad that we're doing this after dinner.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah, this is, I will say, I've never heard of the serial killer before. I started researching, and it's incredible how, like, prolific this serial killer
So, wait,
is.
there are, like, B-list serial killers? Because I guess I would have always taken for granted that, like, if someone's
A serial killer?
like, you know about them.
No.
No.
This one is very interesting. But before we get started, anything fun or interesting happened this week for you?
I actually, like, had an anecdote from the other day, and now I can't remember it. It was something about a coincidence.
I will say that
I was, like, literally thinking, I'm going to talk about this on the podcast.
I know that our espresso machine recently crapped out on us.
Oh, man. We're in the depths of despair.
That's been difficult.
Although we have quite a few, like, coffee making apparatuses in our...
Very true.
We have 2 French presses. Because we bought one, fell in love with it, and then they came out with a smaller version.
Little tiny one. That's
and
the one I was
was
using.
like, it's from IKEA. They were like $7. They weren't expensive.
Yeah, these aren't high quality French press.
But they had a little one, and I was like, well, we have to get that one.
We also have an espresso machine.
We have an espresso. We have a Keurig.
Here's the thing, though. I used to think that an espresso machine was like top dog. Like it was the best coffee maker until we got an actual espresso machine. And there is, in my opinion, a significant difference in the quality.
Difference.
I find that the Nespresso, it has like the creme or like the foam on the top, but it's not, I don't think it's a real creme or like real foam like you would from an espresso shot. And then it dies really quickly. And then it's also like been kind of sour.
I hack it. I like spin the mug around. Well, I'm a little embarrassed to be telling you this, to be perfectly honest. I like spin it as it's like pouring into the cup, and I get a little more of like a foam. Or sometimes if you like wiggle it in a certain way, you can get some really terrible latte art.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's better than not espresso.
I still suck at the latte art. I still haven't figured it out. So we went to Target or Target for the classy people. And we were looking at some espresso machines. I think we'll be getting...
Yeah, maybe that was like the exciting thing that happened, because it had been a while, I feel like, since we'd been to Target, and we went to Target.
I know. Got a gift card. Anyways, do you want to go ahead and get into it? Let's do this.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready? May 5th, 1991. A city worker along a Pennsylvania turnpike was collecting trash. When he located a trash bag...
Oh, okay. So it's either it is a body or the body's in the trash bag.
So he goes to lift the trash bag out of the trash barrel, and he's unable to do so. Curious about why the trash bag weighs so much.
I'm such a worst case scenario person. At this point, I would be like, it's probably a body. I would have already started calling someone. This is why I'm not a trash collector.
So May 5th, 1991, the road worker tries to pick up a bag that's in a trash bin. When he goes to pick up the bag, he finds that it's too heavy to lift. Curious, the worker looks inside, and peering back at him is a human head.
Oh, just the head?
Not just the head.
Oh, but the head's at the top of the stack.
Yes.
Okay. Oh.
In the bag, they also discovered a human torso.
Okay, and what else? Now I'm braced. I'm ready.
The body was later identified as 54-year-old Peter Stickney Anderson. Anderson had been stabbed several times in the torso and the back. Now, this is where it gets pretty graphic. He was also castrated post-mortem, and his penis was severed and placed into his mouth.
Wait. I think I have heard of this one. Well, that's a thing elsewhere. I feel like that's a factoid you don't forget.
Right. It was believed based on the...
I mean, the beginning also sounded really familiar, but I feel like that's kind of common as like someone collecting trash, someone walking through the woods, and like find something that they...
It was believed that he had died approximately 37 hours prior. So he had died recently. Anderson was identified by his belongings that were found at a separate location along another highway. He was last seen, and this is important, he was last seen in Manhattan's Midtown piano bar called Townhouse Bar.
Okay, and he's been found in Pennsylvania.
And he's been found in Pennsylvania on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Using a process called canocrylate fuming, 28 prints and 3 palm prints were pulled from trash bags that contained the body. The prints were submitted to New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia databases, but there were no matches. So what we have here is a human body that has been mutilated, chopped up. It didn't specify here, but his arms and legs were also severed.
Okay.
And obviously the mutilation of the body and the way that it was kind of presented suggests that it was sexually motivated. A little over a year later, this horrific scene would repeat itself. On July 10th, 1992, a worker along a New Jersey Route 72 found several trash bags with human remains. Now, I actually pulled this directly from the wiki. I just literally copied and pasted because there's so much description on what was done to this body. Okay. If you got an issue with me using Wikipedia, get over it. So the body was also dismembered as before. One bag contained intestines, a stomach, a latex glove, and a plastic cup.
The latex glove is fascinating to me.
Yeah, you'll find that this serial killer wasn't...
we're going deeper this time, like, no pun intended. Like,
you'll find that the serial killer is not the most... he's not great at like, covering his tracks, as I described before.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to know, because you always have, like, a scientific kind of angle for these, and at this point in time, I have no idea what it's about to be.
Right. Oh, it's also, I didn't specify, the canocrylate fuming, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a process in which they use, they vaporize super glue in order to find prints on surfaces.
Oh.
That's actually not
cool.
going to be our primary forensic.
Really? No, I was like,
there's something a lot cooler that they
and I actually thought it was maybe like that I was like the inspiration for that, because a couple weeks ago I was super gluing something and I got like a significant amount on my hand, and I did not handle that well. But I was like asking you, like, Google, like, I was panicked.
Right.
I was like, this needs to come off right now. And you're like, well, it will probably come off when your skin cells fall off. Yep. And I was like, nope. Then we're cutting the hand off.
That's usually how long it takes.
So I was like, oh, I inspired this episode. But no.
Okay. So, like I said, one bag contained intestines, a stomach, a latex glove, and a plastic cup. The stomach was cut in half and placed into 2 bags.
Okay.
The 4th bag held a portion of the victim's skin with a bite mark on it.
Is there, not to like get ahead, but are we going to find out the reasons for these choices at any point? Because I'm fascinated.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
is a serial killer like,
it's a
yeah,
serial killer.
so my like inspiration behind the separate bags was blah blah
I'm
blah
not
blah
really
blah.
sure, but you'll see here that there is
Because
a
that
very
seems like a lot of work for.
there's a very consistent theme with this serial killer. And the way he presents the victims' bodies is ritualistic. Okay.
I don't know
Um
why that word
yeah.
is what
So
got to me after.
yeah. Yeah, so like I said, the 4th bag held a portion of the victim's skin with a bite mark on it, and the last bag had a blood-stained compass saw, a pair of latex gloves, a shower curtain, and a bed sheet on it. 2 hours later, a 6th bag containing the victim's legs were found in a picnic area at Garden State Parkway in Stanford Township. That's also in New Jersey. His body also had been cleaned and drained of blood.
Like a deer carcass? Like,
Yeah. And it gets weirder.
does it?
Yeah, it gets weirder. There are also receipts of the items like the saw and the trash bags and the gloves that were found with the body. These came back to stores in the Staten Island area, so they believe that this killer lives in the Staten Island area.
Okay.
But of course, this is 92, so
You
they
said
have
91.
well,
Oh, but it's a year later. Okay, sorry.
first one
I'm
was
with you now.
91, the second one was 92.
Okay.
And there was no surveillance footage at the stores.
Okay.
So they didn't get any really useful information.
Cat hair on you.
There were no prints recovered at this murder, but there was DNA found within the gloves. So
Okay.
they did have DNA.
Because then I was going to ask about the cup too, because like
I'm not really sure about the cup.
Because I mean, I don't know, maybe the cup is just there for like showmanship purposes, but like you would think that like we're sitting here drinking out of mugs right now, and like I know like lip prints and like DNA.
Well, there's also bite marks as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, how good, good were the bite marks? Like, was it like enough that you could?
Apparently not. They weren't able, obviously, to identify him using the fingerprints, the bite marks, or the DNA.
I mean, they had to be strong enough bite marks to like still be showing, I guess. So they had to be pretty significant.
Yeah. So, like I said, they found DNA within gloves.
Because if you like bite down like on your skin, like I don't know why you would, but like it leaves like an impression for a few seconds and then like it goes away.
Right. They were able to collect DNA and they tried running it through CODIS, which is the combined DNA indexing system. And we still use that today. And there were no matches for the DNA. So this somewhat indicates that he doesn't have like an extensive criminal history if he's not in the New York criminal database.
Or she,
right?
I mean, that some like
female serial killers are very rare. You can just assume that it's going to be a guy.
Yeah, but I was going to say if there was like going to be a female serial killer, I feel like a lot of this like very specific and like some of the like I've definitely encountered men that like I would chop parts of their body off and put them in other places.
Not on the podcast, okay? All right. The second body was determined to be Thomas Richard Mulcahy, a 57-year-old married man that had 4 children. He too died of stab wounds to the chest and the back. So there is a very consistent theme here.
I was going to say, and how old was the other guy? He was in his 50s too, right?
I think he was 54. Let me see here. Yeah, he was 54.
Okay.
I forgot that I can check mark.
So essentially the same age.
Yes. So we also that's a good point. We have a 50-something-year-old white man both times that were stabbed to death, chopped up, dismembered. And it's also another thing that is really kind of haunting about the way that these bodies were dismembered, and this is important, is that the bodies were dismembered by disarticulation,
Okay.
Not by cutting through the bones. There were no cuts or broken bones. There was no sawn or broken bones. The killer had actually disarticulated or dislocated the bones at the joints.
Like, undid the jigsaw puzzle.
Which suggests a very intimate knowledge of human anatomy.
Yeah.
So,
well, and not just human anatomy, but like skeletal structure.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and it makes sense, but I didn't even like realize that you could take a body apart like that. Like,
yeah, so
because when you think about it for a second, it's like, well, yeah, of course bones come apart, but like, it's not something you like.
Yeah, no,
doesn't feel good to
well,
think about.
it's. I mean,
like, I know there was an episode of Dear Hanging John where they talked about how like dry as a bone isn't like real, like, because bones aren't dry when they're walking around inside of you. Don't eat while you're listening to this podcast, I guess.
Thomas was originally from Massachusetts. I can't believe I actually said that correctly, but was visiting New York at the time. He was a technology salesman,
and the other guy was seen in New York. Sorry, I'm like, I'm very into this one.
Yeah. So
I love foreshadowing, like, because I like to be able to put clues together.
Yeah. So more importantly than him last being seen in New York, you remember the name of the bar that the last guy had been found at?
It was something about piano.
It was a piano bar called Townhouse Bar.
Okay.
According to Thomas's credit card history, the last place he was known to be
was Townhouse
Bar in New York. And this is like known to be it was a relatively new bar in the early 90s, but was known to be like a fancy high life gay bar. So it attracted people like businessmen, doctors, lawyers, people of that stature, but was known to be a gay bar.
Like, was it actually a gay bar, or was it like a wink wink gay bar? Because I know, like, in the town I grew up in, there were two. There was like an obvious like gay bar that was like owned and operated by a drag queen.
This wasn't like,
and then there was also a martini bar that was like a wink.
Right.
Wink.
This wasn't like a leather gay bar. This was like more of the wink wink kind of gay bar.
All right.
But it was known as a gay bar. Like, people understood that.
Yeah, well, I mean, so was the martini bar. Yeah.
Thomas's wife was shocked by the news that her husband had been killed because her middle-aged, business, clean-cut husband was found dismembered along the side of a New Jersey highway, right? But she, I guess, did have a suspicion that her husband was bisexual. So whenever she found out that he was last known to be at a gay bar, she wasn't necessarily shocked by that. And it kind of gave her some insight into what happened to her husband. And the reason why I bring her out is because she's a little bit important in the future. Interestingly enough, though, all the sources that I found just refer to her as Tom's wife.
I was going to say, so if she's important, like, what's her name?
I don't know. I don't know why they didn't.
Well,
I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but
that's very misogynistic. I mean,
well, maybe she didn't want people to know what her name was. Like I said, the Townhouse Bar was an upscale piano bar that attracted high-class individuals, and it was known as a gay bar. So for the most part, no, the police didn't have any kind of leads on who was doing this.
Okay.
But a witness, I guess, did say that Thomas was last seen at the Townhouse Bar leaving with a white male that was about 5'10", thin build, and brown hair. So that's about the only description or idea they have as far as a suspect. On May 10th, 1993, a third victim would be found along Crow Hill Road in New Jersey. There was a second body found in New Jersey. This was the body of Anthony Edward Marrero, a 44-year-old gay prostitute of Manhattan.
Okay.
So he's also from Manhattan.
I like the repetition of like point A to point B that continues to happen, other than our one like Pennsylvania outlier.
Again, assuming that this is one killer, he is selecting from a very specific group of people at a very specific location.
Yeah.
So unlike the other two, Anthony was a known prostitute, but he was, a gay man in Manhattan. His body had been found by a resident who was alarmed by an overwhelming smell of decomposition coming
Ew.
from a black trash bag along the road. When they looked inside, they found a human leg. Nearby, police found the remaining bags. His body had been cut into 7 pieces. His arms, legs, torso, his torso had been cut in half, and his head.
So how does that work? So I guess his spine would be like...
I don't know.
Okay.
I've never cut somebody into pieces, but apparently his torso had been cut in half. The cause of death, again, was stab wounds to the back and the torso.
We don't even get, like...
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know... Like, I've never even, like, deboned, like, a chicken.
That's gross. By the way, I worked in a restaurant. I hated that.
Yeah, well, and I remember, like, watching, like, a chicken get, like, spatchcocked or something on, like, the Food Network once and being like, wow.
So he'd been killed like the others, stabbed multiple times in the torso and the back, and his body parts had been cleaned and his blood had been drained.
Okay.
So, like I said, it's very ritualistic. Cleaning a body is a bit weird. And
I
you can
also
assume...
want the, like, stabbed in the back thing to be, like, metaphorical. I know it's not going to be, but, like, maybe this is someone that they trusted, and then they're like, haha, I'm literally stabbing you in the back. Because this serial killer seems to appreciate a good,
So, another thing to mention is that I guess the stab wounds appear to be emotional. Like, it was very violent and multiple stab wounds.
Okay.
Suggesting that there was, like, an emotional aspect to the murder.
Like a high energy situation.
Yeah.
When the rest of it seems very, like, deliberate and...
Also, again, there was no mention of the bodies having been, sexually abused or anything like that. But the presentation and I guess the nature of the killing, it was deemed to be sexual in nature. That was seemed to be like the motivation.
Yeah, there's actually, like, a pretty famous case of, like a high school teacher preying on, like, teenage boys, and he, like, accidentally killed one in, like, the Chicago area. And I won't get too into it, but the parts of this remind me a little bit of that. Like, that sometimes, like, if he had, like, one kind of problem at one point in his, like, rituals, he would, like, go to, like, plan B and do something equally horrific. But, like, I'm not going to talk about it on the podcast, but I'll tell you about it after because it's pretty awful.
From this murder, they were able to pull 2 prints and a palm print, but again, there were no matches in any database. Anthony was last seen near Port Authority Bus Terminal in Manhattan.
How close is that to our piano bar?
It said it was on West Side Manhattan, which I don't know exactly. I'm not too familiar with New York, but the piano bar was in Midtown.
Okay.
So, I mean, it is Manhattan, so it's still like the main city.
Yeah. On
the morning of July 31st, 1993, I think this is like 10 months later, the last known victim would be found by a hot dog vendor in Haverstraw Bay, New York. This body was also found along a road. And it's kind of interesting because it's like the hot dog vendor. I've seen photos. The hot dog vendor, it's like a food truck. And it's along this kind of like, there's like an embankment. And then there's looked like a cliff. And a guardrail, and then like a gravel area. And the food truck had parked there, I guess. And there was a barrel there, and he ended up finding the body in the barrel. This body was 56-year-old Michael Sakara. His head and arms were found in the trash bin. 9 days later, the rest of his remains were found 10 miles north in Stony Point, New York. His body was cleaned and drained of all its blood. So again, the exact same MO. His body was cut into 7 pieces and stabbed several times. However, he was bludgeoned to death.
Oh.
So I don't know if something went wrong in that one.
I was going to say, like, is that, like, if they don't go down by stabbing,
well,
I also have
you'll see later on that there is something significant about the bludgeoning.
Okay.
Michael was said to be an outgoing, social, openly gay man in the early 90s, which kind of gives you an idea what kind of person he might have been. Michael was last seen at the Five Oaks Bar in West Side Manhattan.
Okay.
And this too was like a upper class, like piano bar type of place. So similar to Townhouse Bar. There actually was a witness with this one. It was a bartender. She recalled that Michael had introduced a man to her on the night that he was last seen alive. The waitress thought little of the interaction at the time, but stated that Michael appeared to know the man and seemed familiar with him. To her, the man that she was introduced to seemed unremarkable, unmemorable, just kind of like your average Joe type of guy. And she couldn't remember his name. She was like, it's some normal name like Mark or John. But one thing she was able to recall was that she believed he worked as a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan.
What? So he would be very aware of the human. And
yeah, I also think it's kind of ballsy to say, to like introduce yourself to a potential witness and divulge that kind of information about yourself if you're a killer.
Leaving like bite marks and
fingerprints and DNA. Yeah. Like he's not.
Well, and at this point, wouldn't you be like, well, haven't caught me yet?
I guess so. She said that he was a white male in his mid-50s, light brown hair, medium build, kind of matching the description of the guy.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, what did she give a physical descriptor?
Yeah, kind of matching the description of the guy that Thomas was seen with.
Because at the time, and I know, like, you know how this ends, and like you're only giving relevant information, but you know, I've walked out of places talking with someone, just kind of like if you walk out at the same time, you make small talk. You know, you might laugh about like a door being sticky or, you know, like comment on the weather, and then like you go your separate ways and it's no big deal. So
after this last kill, the murders became sensationalized and the media dubbed this serial killer the last call killer because he was picking up gay men at bars. The police put together a multi-jurisdictional joint task force to locate the killer. They conducted several undercover operations at gay bars attempting to find the killer. They also had a sketch that they got talking to the bartender and released that information. They also, with the bartender's description, they looked into several hospitals to find any people that might match that description and kind of have like a history. They did find one person of interest, but ultimately ruled them out.
You said, she said St. Vincent specifically, right?
She did, but they wanted to check all the hospitals in the area. Like I said, they found one person of interest, but they turned out not to be. Well, they had like an alibi or whatever. I'm not really sure, but they ruled them out. In November of 1993, the task force, unable to find the killer or any relevant information, was disbanded. It wasn't until April of 1999, due to the persistence of Thomas's wife, which is why I kind of brought her up. Investigators learned of a new forensic technique known as vacuum metal deposition that was being used by the Toronto police. And this is the
that's like right next door. Just like drive up the coast.
Yeah, right. This is the process by which you heat 10 milligrams of gold to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which causes the metal to vaporize. And you do this within a vacuumed container. The gold vapors create a thin coating along the surface of the item that you want to fingerprint. And any place where there are fingerprints, like the actual ridges, the gold will settle into the ridges of the fingerprint.
This sounds so pretty.
I know, right?
Like, I'm very into it.
You then do the same thing with zinc. You vaporize the zinc within the vacuum chamber, and the zinc particles will only adhere to gold. And like I said, the gold that is on the fingerprints actually goes beneath whatever material the fingerprints are made of, and the zinc will be unable to adhere to that surface, or because the gold won't be on the top. So what you end up creating is a negative of the fingerprints. This process is really great because it allows you to pull fingerprints from an item that are up to 20 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right?
Because I know in the last episode, we talked about the history of fingerprints and kind of like the science behind how they came to be like a method of crime solving. I asked like if like fingerprint material like degrades the same way DNA does. So fascinating.
So they're able to pull prints that are up to 20 years old. It can also be used on more porous surfaces, even cloth. And due to the fact that the prints are negatives, DNA can still be retrieved from the surface, from the
That's
print.
fascinating. I actually had someone ask me just the other day if fingerprints were on cloth, like clothes.
Hmm.
And I was like, I actually don't know,
Yeah, I
but I
don't
bet my
know.
husband does.
I don't know how good of the quality of print you'd be able to get, but it is
Hmm.
say you can pull prints from like a porous surface or a textured like
Hmm.
fabric.
Hmm.
So I don't know. So once investigators learned of this method, they ended up sending all of the bags in the cases to the Toronto Forensic Lab. And after they processed it, 6 months later, they found 35 fingerprints and 3 palm prints on the bags. With this discovery, the print packets were sent to all 50 states, including Puerto Rico. Now, this was in 1999.
Okay.
Okay. So you got to remember, not every place had their stuff put into APHIS, which is the database for fingerprints.
Hmm.
So some places were still getting that technology up and going. It wouldn't be until 2001 that there would be a hit from these fingerprints in Maine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. These prints belong to 50-year-old Richard Rogers.
That's a cool name.
That is not a.
That's well. It sounds like
He's a serial killer.
well, it sounds like a bad guy. I guess is what I
Yeah, it
meant.
does.
Like
It's like a alliterative,
alliterative. Yeah.
alliterative.
Alliterative. Oh my gosh.
Don't make me say words I can't say.
Alliteration.
Alliteration. There you go. It's an alliteration. His name's an alliteration, which means that it starts with the same
Sound.
same sound. Richard Rogers.
Mm.
Well, you also got an English lesson there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the part that kind of blows my mind.
This is the part.
Okay, Maine had Richard's prints on file since 1973.
Why?
But due to the limitations at the time, Maine's APHIS system was not up and
Yep.
online until 2001.
But what? So why did they have his print?
We're going to get to that because this is absolutely bonkers.
Okay.
Richard was born June 16th, 1950 in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hell of a... Richard was born June 16th, 1950 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. He had 4 younger siblings and was described as being feminine when he was younger, with a high-pitched voice making him a target for bullies. When he was young, his family moved from Massachusetts to Florida. He was said to be more interested in going to Girl Scout meetings with his mother rather than playing sports. So, they're kind of like describing him as being not a very
this is like
boyish
a very
boy.
prejudiced way to describe this person.
So I know that these things are like kind of portrayed in a negative light, but these are like perfectly normal things for a boy to have a high pitched voice or like be somewhat feminine or be interested in things other than sports. I mean, I'm not interested in sports. I think the point though in saying this was it was 1950s. So I think the reason why this is being brought up is that at that time, a young boy with these kind of tendencies probably would probably be bullied a lot. So it wouldn't be as accepted, which I think is important to note when it comes to serial killers, is possibly like the way that they were raised.
Mm-hmm.
In
well,
this,
not raised necessarily, but like
their life
the environment.
Yeah, their like life experiences I think can influence them. In the 60s, Richard allegedly attacked his elderly neighbor, stabbing her with a knife. She did not die from this attack, but it was believed to be he stabbed her because she rejected his sexual advances. So
his elderly. Okay.
Richard graduated Palmetto High School, which is
that's
way close to us.
Wow.
In 1968, and then he attended Florida Southern College.
That's close enough that last time we were at the grocery store, there was a kid with a Palmetto High School hoodie on.
He attended Florida Southern College in Lakeland, Florida, which again is super close to us, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree of arts in French. So he was also highly intelligent. He was a straight A student. In 1973, he attended graduate school at the University of Maine with 3 roommates, one of which was Frederick Spencer. Frederick and Richard were known to dislike one another, but beyond the typical roommate disagreements, there was nothing unusual about their relationship. So we've had roommates that we didn't get along with in the past. That was kind of how this was. They were just roommates that didn't quite get along with each other. On April 28th, 1973, using a roofing hammer, Richard struck Frederick 8 times in the back of the head. These blows on the back of the head did not kill Frederick.
Would you say he bludgeoned him?
He bludgeoned him, which is why...
But not to death.
Not to death.
And in the back of the head.
In the back of the head.
Just like our other friends were stabbed in the back.
Realizing that Frederick wasn't dead, Richard placed a plastic bag over his head and asphyxiated him to death.
Oh, so he does. He's like, if something doesn't work out the first time. So then why did he go back and bludgeon?
I don't know.
What's his name when the stabbing didn't?
But he does have a history of bludgeoning people. He then placed the body into a Boy Scouts tent, drug it outside the house through the parking lot, and placed it into his car. He then drove a minute away to Bird Stream Forest where he dumped the body.
So yeah, he's like, this is good enough.
Yeah. All right, here we go. So like I said, he's not very good at like covering up his tracks, but somehow it's not until 2001 that he ends up getting caught.
Well, I wonder if there's like some stereotyping there, because again, the bartender was like, he's not a very assuming guy.
Well, it's also worth noting that, how seriously did the police take the deaths of four gay men? Well, that was
the other thing, too, because when you were talking about them putting a task force together, I'm like, well, at least they were, because
Yeah,
you hear a lot about, like, people who are, like, groups of people who are typically discriminated against, like, when they go missing, like, white girls, when they go missing, you hear about it, but, like, there's an epidemic of Indigenous women going missing and being murdered, and like you don't hear about that,
right? And they did have DNA and they had fingerprints from literally every single murder. How they weren't able to put those together, I'm not really sure. I know, again, you have the limitation of technology, but Maine's not that far away.
It's not that far away.
So I don't know. I feel like they dropped the ball pretty hard on that one. 2 cyclists located the body the next day, Frederick's body, the next day, and using a P.O. box key that was located in Frederick's pocket, police were able to trace the murder back to Richard. Police found Richard's room had several bloody fingerprints, the bloody hammer, a bloody rug that Richard tried to throw away, and obviously indicating that he was trying to clean the scene.
Well, I mean, not very well, apparently, if the hammer is just hanging around.
Right. Richard was arrested for the murder, obviously, and his fingerprints were taken then in 1973.
Do we know what the straw that broke the camel's back was, as far as his roommate?
We don't know. He's a very quiet guy, and he does not talk about these murders. Still to this day, hasn't admitted to them. So on October 29th, 1973, the trial of Frederick Spencer's murder began. There were numerous witnesses and evidence submitted into record, but the trial ended with Richard Rogers himself testifying. According to witnesses, Richard performed quite well during his testimony and appeared genuine, calm, and convincing. Richard claimed in the trial that he did in fact kill Frederick, but only after Frederick had initially attacked him with the roofing hammer. It was only in self-defense that he took the hammer away from Frederick and struck him in the back of the head.
Was there any physical evidence to back that up, or is this just a case of him knowing exactly what to say? Because as we've said before, he's a smart guy.
I think this is just the fact of him knowing exactly what to say, because he was able to convince the jury that despite the fact that he very obviously tried to, clean the scene, and after he bludgeoned him, he's asphyxiated. He put a bag over his head, very intentionally attempting to kill this guy. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because if not to get too much into this, but like I was like attacked once at a party, and I got a hold of some car keys and I stabbed my attacker in the thigh with a set of car keys, and I took off. I didn't keep going I didn't stab his eyeballs out with the car keys and then go to the kitchen for a meat cleaver and a grocery bag and just finish the job.
So he told them that the reason why he continued to kill him, asphyxiate him, and clean up the scene, take his bodies because he got scared and didn't know what to do. So that's his argument. Richard's attorney requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, which the judge actually agreed to.
Okay.
Which blows my mind. And on November 3rd, after 3 hours, that's it, of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict of not guilty. They found him not guilty. He took a hammer to a dude's head, put a bag over his head, and then disposed of his body in a freaking forest. And they're like, not guilty.
Is he very, like, charming? Like, is he good looking? Is he, like... No.
Well, I will put a photo on the video of Richard. He is not...
Well, you're a straight guy, though. I feel like you're not the authority on this.
Okay, I'm not the authority on this, but you guys can tell me. You can tell me if you think...
But there are, I mean, not to like liken children to serial killers, but, like, kids are like that sometimes where, you know, I've, like, been in positions where I've had to, like, redirect behavior, and there are certain kids that, like, you will see them do something, like, unacceptable, and you go over and you're like, you can't do that, or if, you know, you broke this, you have to clean it up, or if you spilled that, you've got to pick it up, and they'll look you dead in the eye and be like, I didn't, though. I didn't. And it's like, wow, I
almost believe
I'm am I gaslighting myself right now? Like,
so after the trial, he moved to New York, where he attended Pace University, the School of Nursing. After graduating from the university in 1978 and earning his master's degree in science, he was hired as a nurse by Mount Sinai Medical Center. He eventually became a surgical nurse. There you go, and worked in the pediatric ward. So there's how he had such an intimate knowledge of the human body. Was one, he was a nurse, but two, he worked in the as a surgical nurse. So May 28th, 2001, investigators brought Richard in for questioning under the guise that he was being investigated for credit card fraud. Apparently, I don't know if he had credit card fraud as well, but apparently he was like, yeah, sure, I'll come in for that.
Come in for that. Got nothing better to do to this afternoon.
I murdered a bunch of people, but sure, credit card fraud. Richard stated he knew Michael Sakara, but denied any involvement in the murders. And still, as far as I know, to this day, has denied all involvement. In October of 2005, Richard stood trial for the murders of Thomas McCulhay and Anthony Marrero. In November, after only 4 hours of deliberating, the jury found him guilty on all charges. Rogers is currently serving a 2 consecutive life sentence for both of the murders at a New Jersey state prison in Trenton, New Jersey. So, he didn't actually get tried or convicted of the other 2 murders, but it's heavily believed that he was involved. I'm not sure.
Pretty consistent.
I'm not sure why. I don't know if like the physical evidence didn't tie into him, or if that was just because sometimes prosecutors are like, we're just going to try these cases so that it's, you know, more efficient trial, stuff like that. So I'm not really sure, but it's also worth noting that those are the 4 that are attributed to him. It is believed that he has significantly more murders under his belt.
And we just haven't found the bodies, or
there are other murders that actually occurred before these. There was a guy who was found, his body wasn't dismembered.
I buy this because even the first one seems a little like
it seems
too
like
specific to be like a first rodeo type of a...
I don't remember, forgive me, I don't remember his name, I can look it up. But there was an older man, I think he was in his 50s as well, that was found, I think in Pennsylvania, inside of a barrel, like folded in half inside a barrel, and he too had his penis removed, and it was in his mouth. So somewhat fitting the description. There's also there's some people that speculate whether or not it was another killer that was operating in the area at the same time, but it predates these 4 murders. He also is believed to have possibly killed people in Florida, California, Minnesota, due to the fact that he traveled a lot. So it's believed that he killed in multiple states.
Mhm.
So it's possible that he had a lot more murders than what we just talked about.
Mhm.
So I think he was very prolific.
Well, and that's what, like, that reminds me of, and I couldn't think of this earlier, Israel Keys.
Hmm.
He, like, buried, like, kill kits, and that is kind of, like, I know a lot about that guy because he, like, Lauren Spears, like, my hometown, like, disappearance, and
Hmm.
it's, like, very personal to me, like, that hits close to home, like, quite literally, because I was out at the bars the night she disappeared,
Hmm.
and one of my best friends was actually drugged at that bar, at the
Right.
same bar she disappeared from, and that was a very specific, like, visceral memory for me. But Israel Keys was actually in the area when she disappeared.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but he, like, carried, like, kill kits and, like, killed while he was on vacation. Like,
Right. Yeah.
imagine that being, like, a thing that you do is just, like,
You just go out and kill
like,
people.
because you and I, we get, like, a souvenir mug, maybe a t-shirt, but only if we're at the St. Augustine Lighthouse.
Yeah.
But it's an inside joke from a different podcast.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know what his psyche was. I don't know if it was because he was, I don't know. You never know with serial killers why they do the things that they do.
mhm,
It sounds like he probably had a somewhat difficult upbringing,
mhm,
probably bullied a lot, but it sounds to me that most of these killings were probably sexually motivated to some degree, and like the skill at which he was able to disarticulate all these bodies is kind of insane. I know that he was a surgical nurse,
mhm,
but the fact that he was able to do it with such precision suggests to me that he has a lot of experience doing this.
mhm.
So I think that also lends credit to this idea that he probably had other victims well before, these four that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and imagine if he had actually been convicted of the murder of his roommate in 1973, how many lives that probably would have saved.
Yeah.
I I cannot comprehend. He bludgeoned him to death, or
Mhm.
bludgeoned him, and then suffocated him to death,
Mhm.
drug his body out to this parking lot, to put him in his car, and then dumped him in the forest.
Mhm.
That says to me that he was very intentionally murdering that person. How they came back with a verdict of not guilty blows my mind. And then you have the question of how committed were the police, considering the victims were gay men
Mhm.
in the early 1990s, right? I know that they put forth that multi-jurisdictional task force to try to find the killer,
Yeah.
but that was only after there was some media craze about, like, it became a media sensation,
Mhm.
right? So now there's public interest and there's public push to investigate these murders, and it only lasted until November of 1993.
Yeah.
So I don't know how committed they were at the time, because you also had you had DNA evidence and fingerprint evidence, and you were unable to find them. They no one thought, hey, maybe this person came from a neighboring state like
Yeah.
Maine.
Well, and then too, I feel like this is a thing I bring up often, but um, the stuff like this is still happening today, and there are still prejudices. There's kind of like a cliche that, like, when a, like, white girl goes missing, like, everyone knows about it.
Right, we
But
just had
then,
that recently.
and yeah, indigenous people
Yeah.
or indigenous women go missing and are murdered, and it's to the point where it's an epidemic, and very little has been done about that,
Mhm.
and that to me is just, like, horrific. So, and stuff like this still happens. I mean, I have some of my best friends are gay, and,
Mhm.
like, they still have just, like, horrendous stories that they come back to me with. Even it's 2022, people
Mhm.
get woke.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I thought this was a very interesting case. I don't know how he's not better known, because,
Mhm.
like, you have your organized and your disorganized killers,
Right.
right? And I think people are most fascinated with the organized killers. So you got your Ted Bundy,
Yeah.
your Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, right?
Well, I think that's
And
that's like scarier because they feel good at it, you know, and like those are people who like have
yeah,
people like Ted Bundy had all of his like friends tricked into thinking there was no way that he could be a bad guy because he was a good guy when you felt like it. If
right.
you didn't match his, you know, type.
And I will say, you haven't seen photos of this guy, but Richard Rogers looks like just the most average person. Like, he really looks just completely average. You would
I'm gonna
probably
look him
never
up.
suspect
Oh.
this guy. But he also, like these other well-known killers, I think was more organized in kind of the way, the ritualistic way that he killed his victims, dismembered them, cleaned the bodies, drained the blood, presented them pretty much the same way. He always put the
Richard
heads.
Ramirez popped up.
Yeah.
He's a cutie, by the way. He's my
Uh-huh.
favorite serial killer.
So-
He's so adorable. He's got that hair. Okay.
So,
what's his last name? Richard Rogers?
Rogers. So he
I got distracted by the other one. Oh.
yeah.
Okay.
You see what I mean? He's just
Yeah, I kind of like
painfully
threw shade at you
average.
the other day, a few minutes ago, because you were like, well, he's not a very good looking dude. And I'm like, you as a straight man, you don't get to say that.
Mhm.
Like, how would you know? But
He kind of like, so he's so average.
I was gonna say
He's so average that the
it's not even that he's bad looking. He just doesn't look notable. And it's funny. I'm like thinking back to that bartender that was like, he had an unmemorable face.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Because you've walked past this exact person like in the airport and not noticed him.
Yeah,
he looks like every white guy ever.
Yeah. So that's probably why he was able to kind of go under the radar for so long. But like I said, he's so organized compared to even some of like the best known serial killers.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's the thing.
How he's not better known. Not that he should be.
You know what? Because
not that he should be.
Because we live under the shadow of the patriarchy, and this is probably not a case that most men want to talk about because it doesn't look good for you guys.
No. Yeah. Well, Dahmer, you know, he had similar victims, except his victims were primarily men of color. So I don't know. I don't know what makes this guy different from. I guess Dahmer
had those iconic glasses, though. I think maybe that's what this guy's lacking is like style. Because that was a thought that like triggered because I typed in Richard and it's like, do you mean Richard Ramirez? And it's like that photo of him like in handcuffs, like staring at the camera, and I'm like, oh hey, serial killer crush, there you are. And then I was like, oh well, maybe this guy just like because Ted Bundy was like. Yeah. Notoriously like good looking, even he doesn't do it for me. And like Richard Ramirez is like known to be like an attractive guy, and even like Dahmer isn't like a good looking dude, but he's like got a look.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe he just wasn't like showy enough to really like catch on to the media's attention. I'm still, I think, processing the fact that there are serial killers that like aren't lay person, the average person wouldn't know. Because I feel like you could go up to anyone and be like, name 5 serial killers, and like the average person could probably do it.
Yeah.
Or at least like describe them. Like I couldn't think of Israel Key's name earlier, but like I was like the kill kit guy.
Yeah. So I also found that the process, the vacuum metal deposition, was also super cool. The fact that they were able to. Because, like I was saying earlier, unlike any other fingerprint process that I'm aware of, the vacuum metal deposition process allows you to still retrieve DNA from a fingerprint. Otherwise, it would absolutely, as far as I know, any other process is going to destroy that DNA. So that's pretty impressive. And the fact that you can pull it from...
Plus, it sounds like fancy.
Yeah, right?
Like, it sounds pretty.
You can pull it from, like, numerous different types of fabrics that are incredibly complicated to try to pull prints from. It's a really neat process. I never have heard of it before.
Well, yeah, and I think that's like kind of I'm interested that I've never heard of this, or at least not heard it and retained it. But the fact that you can pull a fingerprint off of fabric is really fascinating to me, because you think about like you kind of hear people like wiping fingerprints, but I know that, like typically the surfaces talked about are like hard surfaces, like
Mm-hmm.
the side of a card
Well, that's
or
typically
something.
what you've got to work with.
Yeah. So just the fact, like someone just happened to ask me the other day if fingerprints were like detectable on clothing. And I was like, that's a great question. I have no idea.
Yeah. I don't know if like a cotton shirt would be able to collect print off of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing it would be a more fine, less textured surface.
Like silk or something.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not really
Well, it's
entirely sure,
it's
but
very
I think
cool either way.
Mhm.
Like, and it seems like, I don't know, like such specific circumstances would warrant it
Mhm.
that, I don't know, like what a cool job to have. If you were
Right?
like,
Right? I don't know. I'm gonna keep this in mind in case I ever have to use it myself. I'm gonna be like, hey, vacuum metal deposition.
well, if you
we should
do, I
try
want to like go
using it."
watch because I want to go see like the gold on the fingerprints.
Well, I doubt I'd be able to witness it, but it would be cool to be
Well,
like,
pull strings. Call in whatever
hey,
favor you need to call in.
I know this really cool technique called vacuum metal deposition.
Like I said the word gold in front of my wife, and she would like to be involved in some way, shape, or form. She'll go get coffee. She'll do anything.
So yeah,
she will hum a song of your choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever.
So yeah, I very interesting case. So I think that's going to do it for us this episode. This has been Crime Will Tell. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Kate.
Until next time.